Good. Well, welcome back. We had, 1 week off of screen time at 6 o'clock at least. So last week was online, it was pre-recorded. If you have questions about anything that we said or anything that was spoken about, just let me know today in the chat, or maybe you can put up your hand in the participant panel and then I'll unmute you. You can ask that way. Or again, the discussion forum is always there online on my Canvas. This is week 11. Suddenly we're at the end of the semester. It kind of crept up on us. So this week we have Scandinavia, and then after that we have Eastern Europe and the rest, and then after that's the final week. So what do those weeks look like specifically? Let's show you. So like I said, next week is Eastern Europe and the rest, and that's just a way of saying everything that we have not talked about yet in Europe, we're going to be looking at next week. So it's a pretty big lesson. So that's the 13th. The following week, August 20th, the last week of class, there is no class really, because that's the day of your final Module 4 test. So you've got the 13th, we have the same thing as this week, class starting at 6. And then the 20th, which is going to be week 13, it's only your module test. I mean, in terms of that there's no class. You will still have to submit your 4th part of the semester project that day, but module 4 test will be written 10 to 6, and then after that there's no class because that's your last test, and so there's nothing more to talk about. Module 4 test I mentioned earlier before I started the recording, but in case you're watching the recording because you couldn't make it to class, the Module 4 test will be 30 questions instead of 50. Everything else is the same in terms of the value of the test. It's still worth 18.5% of the final mark, and it will still be written from 10 to 6 Eastern time. There's 30 questions, 20 of them are non-map questions, so things from the readings in class and the activities and exercises online, and 10 of them are questions about the map. So you'll find that most of those questions, of course, you've already written 3 module tests, so now you know which ones we've already asked about. The pool for the map questions, the 10 map questions, I think there's 18 questions or countries labeled, and you have to name 10 of them. So you'll be shown 10 questions. Same format as before. Everything is multiple choice. So that's it for the next few weeks. Remember that you have a weekly destination quiz that you need to write at some point during the week before 5 p.m. each Thursday. Some of you have missed a few of them, but they're each worth only 1%. In total, they're 10% though, so if you miss all of them, it's not great. So if there's no questions, we'll jump right into our Scandinavia lesson. Okay, so Scandinavia. This is one of those times when you realize that geography is not always cut and dry or black and white, or there's something, it's not always this or that, true and false. Scandinavia is one of those terms that means a few different things. So what is Scandinavia? On each side you have 2 different maps. One of them, which is on the left, it shows Denmark, which is down here, Norway and Sweden. But over here on the right, map of Scandinavia, it shows Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark. So what's the difference, and why is it sometimes that you'll see one region called Scandinavia, and other times if you look up a map, it'll show only these 3 countries on the left? Well, in English, we often say Scandinavia, and we group into that category what is shown on the right. So the English-speaking world, when you say Scandinavia, it consists of Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark. However, if you ask a local, like somebody who's from that area, what is Scandinavia, they will tell you it's Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Okay? Just those three countries only. But for English, we consider that the five countries: Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark. It's just one of those things, and that happens a lot in the world where some things are recognized in certain languages, or there's a different amount of things in different places called different things, and so on. The reason that locals will call that only Scandinavia is because Finland historically, linguistically, or in terms of language, is more closely linked to Russia and their history and their language and their architecture. And same with Iceland. It's been separated for such a long time. It's very far away. It didn't have a whole lot of influence for a long time from Norway, Sweden, or Denmark. So their language is different, their history is different than the rest as well. That's why there's a difference in terms of what we call Scandinavia. But for this lesson, for this class, we'll just stick to the one on the right. Scandinavia is Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, just to make it easy for us. If you, excuse me, if you watched the prep video, you'll know that Scandinavian Airlines, or SAS, is the flag carrier for these three countries, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. So that's an easy way to remember which countries are part of, the locals would call Scandinavia. But back to what we're going to call Scandinavia, which is all of it. So, beautiful scenery, completely different from the places we've studied already this semester. This is just a snippet, a picture of what your average Scandinavian destination can look like. The thing about Scandinavia to know are the seasons, because it really affects the destination more than some other places where it might not. And what I mean by that is high season, so when there's more traffic, more tourists, it's more popular to go, the weather's more comfortable, that's in the summer. And in some places in Scandinavia, it's always daylight in the summer. But if you're like me, I went in low season. And the reason was because, well, it was a tiny bit cheaper, but also that's when you see the northern lights. This beautiful picture with the colors in the sky, you can only really see that in the winter or late fall, early spring. So something to know as a travel professional when you're advising people, when should I go? It gets pretty cold, but sometimes it's worth it if you want to see the northern lights. Otherwise, high season is the summer. So here's our map of Scandinavia minus Iceland. But here featured in most of the map, you see Norway, Sweden, and Finland. Those are the biggest countries, excluding Greenland, because that belongs to one of these guys. But, well, Denmark. Norway, Sweden, Finland are the three biggest in what we're going to call Scandinavia today. And the way that you can remember where they are on the map, not so fast, NSF. Or if you're familiar with bank language from like the 90s, insufficient funds, they used to call that NSF. So not so fast, Norway, Sweden, Finland. An easy way to remember what order they go in that larger part. Something else I wanted to show you is the Arctic Circle. You might have seen on the prep video when we talked about Iceland, how 99.9% of the country of Iceland is below the Arctic Circle. Sometimes you might not think that. But here you can see Norway, Sweden, and Finland. A lot of those countries actually, a lot of it is above the Arctic Circle. And we'll see that little compass again when we talk about Iceland. But let's start off with Denmark. Way down here in the corner, quite small in terms of the Scandinavian countries, especially when you compare it to Norway, Sweden, and Finland. Now, when I was in Denmark, I was really surprised to see that the language and the history was a lot more closely tied to Scandinavia, Sweden, Norway area, even though they have a land border with Germany. I was expecting to see a bit more German influence, but that wasn't the case at all. Pretty interesting. So this is Denmark, and it's on largely the Jutland Peninsula, and otherwise on 400 islands, which about 70 of them are inhabited. The capital city is over here on an island called Zealand, and it's Copenhagen. So let's zoom in and take a look at Copenhagen itself. One of those beautiful things that you see coming from pictures of Copenhagen, it reminds you sort of, in a way, of Dutch architecture, so what you might see in Amsterdam. But the colors are brighter, the roofs are a little bit different in terms of architecture, and there's sailboats here instead of houseboats. And the other thing to know about Copenhagen is I kind of expected the whole city to be like this. This is just the one district. Otherwise, it's not all built on canals like I kind of thought it might be. But the special thing about Copenhagen, aside from the fact that it's the capital, is that it's one of the world's most environmentally friendly cities. So about 36% of all citizens commute to work by bicycle, even in the winter. Very bike-friendly city. So what is there to see in Copenhagen? Well, one of the biggest things people want to see is called Tivoli Gardens. And this is an amusement park. It's actually the second oldest amusement park in the world, opened in 1843. And the author Hans Christian Andersen used to go here for inspiration. This is one of his favorite places to go. That's how old it is. And he wrote stories like The Little Mermaid, for example. So this is called Tivoli Gardens, and it's an amusement park, and it's beautiful inside. You can see, first of all, the architecture. There's roller coasters, and then they have Asian architecture on the right. They have this sort of beautiful architecture on the right in this picture. On the left there, you've got the entrance to the park. So you can see it's very old, very ornate. There's just so much to see. There's a lot of variety in there. And in the winter, the whole thing kind of turns, it's still an amusement park, but around Christmas, it turns into a Christmas market, like so many other things that we've talked about in Europe already. Aside from Tivoli Gardens, we have something called the Church of the Savior. And it's very old, built in 1695. It takes 400 steps to go to the top. The last 150 steps are outside, and you can see them spiraling up to the top. Of course, I did not do it. So we've come to a point in the class that we've seen before, which we looked at in Paris, we looked at it in Venice, and it's what I like to call expectation versus reality. So if you think of Copenhagen, you might know about the Little Mermaid. It's a really famous statue, and this is the expectation. Unveiled in 1913, The Little Mermaid, based on the Hans Christian Andersen tale. It has been stolen a few times, but it keeps coming back. So that's the expectation, you know, this beautiful serene statue sculpture on this rock on the sea. Reality is a bit more like that. But when I went, people were taking turns and being very respectful. So I don't know, maybe this was a bit of a hectic day, who knows. But one of those things that you see. So let's go back to that waterfront district. And that is called Nyhavn. And this is still in Copenhagen. So this is when tourists go, what a highlight of what they want to see. And as you can see, all of these are hotels and bars and restaurants and cafes, and all of that is seating. So it's a beautiful place to have lunch, a little drink, and people watch. So this is from the 17th century. It's the waterfront, and it's a canal and entertainment district. So one of the most important things to remember about Copenhagen is that Nijhaven is this beautiful, colorful neighborhood. Otherwise, we'll go over to Stroget, which is another road in the city, pedestrian only, and it's a shopping district. So we've seen this as well a few times throughout Europe. But this one, it's 3.2 kilometers long, so it's actually the longest car-free shopping district in Europe. So let's leave from Copenhagen and let's go still within Denmark, but to a little town called Billund. And this is where you're going to find Legoland. And they have made so many things out of Lego. You can see Mount Rushmore. You can see what is probably Nijhaven in Copenhagen on the right. And also there, they've rebuilt the entire Munich airport out of Lego. So it's a really cool place to see, especially for Lego fans. I mean, it's sort of like the center for everything Lego. And that's in Billund. Now, before I go on, I should have asked this 20 minutes ago. This tends to happen every week. Has anyone been to Scandinavia? And that can be the Scandinavia we're talking about here. So Iceland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, or Finland. Oh, good. So we have one Iceland, which is awesome. And we have one person whose mom is very excited. And so he's going to be taking careful notes the whole time. That's awesome. It is one of the most exciting places, I think, so far for me to talk about besides Brussels. Probably because it's my most recent, one of my more recent European trips. I just went in November of 2018. So it's pretty fresh. So I was pretty excited putting this together and getting ready for today. So, and we have one person who's been to Iceland too. So when we get there, you'll see lots of familiar stuff, which is good. Okay, so that's it for Denmark. Not a whole lot to talk about, but a few important things in there to remember. So let's talk about Norway. And you can see Norway there, like we talked about, not so fast, NSF, Norway, Sweden, Finland. So Norway here is the one on the furthest west. Capital is Oslo. And a bunch of stuff to talk about when it comes to Norway. We already looked at one of the maps, but let's talk about Sognefjord, which, if you can see, that inlet of water is called Sognefjord. Now, if you're thinking of the country of fjords, that word, but starting at the F, F-J-O-R-D, that describes these inlets that come in from the ocean, and there's mountains on each side, and the mountains continue under the water as well. So they're not shallow at all. And the Sognefjord is, of course, you saw on the map, it goes in forever. So it's the largest fjord in Norway, second longest in the world, and it's 205 kilometers inland. But when you think of lakes, for example, if you think of the deepest lake near us, Lake Superior, I think it's about 400 meters deep or so. These are this one is 1.3 kilometers deep. So it's immense. And they have really interesting engineering feats that they need to consider. They want to build a coastal highway that goes all along the coast of Norway, because now the trip takes an incredible amount of time, and you have to take like 5 or 6 or 7 ferries. You have to put your car on boats 5 or 6 or 7 times to get from one end of the country to the other. So they want to build a road. But that entails going either over or under all of these really big fjords. So there's a really cool video on YouTube, maybe it's 10 minutes or so, um, about them building this road. Really cool. And you can see from this picture just how tall the mountains are on each side. So lots of people will take cruises through these fjords. So that's the Sognefjord of Norway. Let's go to the capital, Oslo. So a few things to talk about in Oslo. There's the Viking Ship Museum, and you can go in. This is from about 850, the year 850. So you can see the Viking ship on display. It was discovered in 1879. And now, again, we're in the capital, Oslo. And you have this really, really bizarre park in Oslo as well, called the Vigeland Sculpture Park. And in this park, you have 212 sculptures, which show the human journey from when people are born to when they die, cradle to grave, womb to tomb, whatever you want to call it. So you can see, this is just one of the bizarre statues. And then here are some others. Very interesting, very different. Lots of people go to the park and they pose in the same positions as the statues to take pictures. So the more you look, the more you see. I mean, this is a fountain and you can see people holding up trees, and there's people here. There's just people everywhere. And then the center of the park, the main attraction, is called the monolith. And this is the monolith. And what it is 121 entwined bodies, taking 14 years to make. So again, that is in Oslo. And it's famous because of all these sculptures of people. So back to our map, and we're going to go up north to Tromsø, above the Arctic Circle. So this is where, in the winter, it's going to be dark for a long time. Speaking of the winter, here's a beautiful picture of Tromsø with the northern lights over it. So this is actually the largest city above the Arctic Circle and home to the world's northernmost university, too. And fun fact, the Coca-Cola plant there, it's the only one in the world where the water is so clean it doesn't have to be purified first. And in the winter, it's sometimes so cold that, you know, the stores have fridges outside and so on, outside of convenience stores and things. Sometimes those are warmers and not actually fridges. So it's 360 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle. Kind of a fun fact, but let's go even further north, way up to Nordkapp, which in Norwegian means North Cape. And if you are really hardcore about seeing the northern lights, you can go there. This is the best place to see the northern lights. And here's a bit of a time lapse of those northern lights and what you can see up there in Nordkapp. So the northern lights, again, you can see these in winter. High season, like I said, is summer because the weather's a bit nicer. But if you want to see the northern lights, it's winter. These are also known as Aurora Borealis. That's the official name for them. And like I said, late fall or autumn, winter, and early spring. And this is where, once again, in Norway, or in general above the Arctic Circle at that latitude, you have complete darkness in the winter and only sunshine in the summer. Let's go south. Back to talking about fjords and so on. Let's go to Bergen, which is a city on the southwest of Norway. And it is absolutely stunning, super pretty. And this is a really good city to start off with if you're interested to see the fjords. You can take fjord tours from this city. First of all, it's accessible. You can get there easily by train from Oslo or even from Sweden. And the city itself of Bergen is beautiful to go see. If you look very carefully, well, this is all the waterfront, of course, as you can see. But if you look carefully, you can see an incline railway which takes you all the way up to the top of the mountain where there's an observatory, there's a lake, there's a restaurant and a cafe. There's a bunch of hiking you can do up there as well. And that goes along these tracks. So here is a picture of Bergen, Norway. Actually, the first picture I took was on the right. And this was, of course, you can tell, under the clouds. It was terrible weather. It was foggy, it was a bit drizzly, it was really cold. And we thought, oh, this is going to be a terrible day. But you know what we said we would do today? We said we would go up the mountain. Thankfully, we did, because the tram, the incline railway, brought us up, and slowly we came above the clouds, and it was a beautiful view. It was really cool to see. And we thought it was so cool, but we didn't get a view of the city. So we went back the following day when it wasn't cloudy at all. So you can see that's exactly the same position, and you can see what a difference one day makes. So the second day, the one on the left, we actually had quite a nice view. Not to say that the one on the right wasn't a nice view, because it was beautiful either way. And here's a bit of a time-lapse video of the tram that I took, going from the top of the mountain down back into the city the first day. Then we just go underground. But beautiful city, as you can tell. And the tram is super cheap also, which is shocking for Scandinavia, which I'm going to get into right now. So here, like I said, is that same waterfront. Over actually on the left, you can see this building here. That's actually a Radisson hotel. This whole facade here, these first few buildings, is a Radisson. The entrance is sort of over on this side. But you can see behind, these are all rooms of the Radisson. So they've got water view rooms. And that's actually where we stayed, because we have our IATA cards, our travel agent cards. And if you can see me on the screen, the IATA cards, which you'll get eventually. I think we paid $100 a night for that hotel, and it should have been like 400. So you get, of course, really good perks with these sorts of things in the industry. But let's talk about what I just mentioned before, prices in Scandinavia. So one of these beautiful buildings is an Irish pub. And I thought, you know, I'm craving something deep fried. I'm craving something that's terrible for me for dinner. Here's a picture of inside the pub. So here's a little game. Get your calculators out, get your minds sharp. This is what I had for dinner, or lunch, I should say. 1 beer, 6 chicken wings. Let's guess how much you thought that was in Canadian dollars. I'll give you a hint. It was 288 Norwegian kronas. We have a guess, $25 Canadian. This is something good to know. Maybe for the student who's taking notes for his mom, or for all of you who are going to be in the travel industry and advising people when they go to Scandinavia. 1 beer, 6 chicken wings was $41.47 Canadian. So when you think of Scandinavia, you need to be very aware of the fact that it's quite expensive, and you will know that because you've been to Iceland. But funny story, at least we made it on the news. So we were sitting at that table there eating, and I guess the cloud situation where you could take the train up to the top of the hill was a bit of a special day, and so it was on the news. And so we were there in the pub hours later. I think it must have been the 6 o'clock news or something. Yeah, we ended up seeing on the TV the view from on top of that mountain, and they panned over, and then there's me and my two friends who were on the trip together, and we're taking pictures and being tourists, and the whole bar knew that we were on the TV because we were screaming, "Oh my God, we're on TV!" But anyway, so at least we made it on the news. And I went in November. So we did go on a fjord cruise, and this is me on the fjord cruise. So you just need to be quite aware of the fact that it will be very cold, coupled with the fact that the fjords tend to be quite windy because the wind comes between those mountains and just goes and picks up speed across those bodies of water. So that's it for Norway for now. Let's go on to Sweden. So, well, see, some of these maps tend to be in their own languages. So Göteborg is what in English we would call Gothenburg, if you've heard of that city. But before we go there, I had to take a train. So I took a train actually from Sweden to Norway. We're going backwards in this lesson. But let's play that game one more time. Prices in Scandinavia. The train from Norway to Sweden. Now this was late. This was overnight, the train. So I had 3 mini, I want to emphasize that, bottles of wine, you know, the ones you get on airplanes, and a hot dog because, you know, class. Let's play that game again, but this time I couldn't remember the local price. So I can't give you that hint, but how much do you think that would have cost? 3 small airplane-sized bottles of wine and a hot dog. Whatever you're guessing, maybe double it. Okay, maybe you, when I said double it, maybe you guessed it right actually. So yeah, it was 110 Canadian dollars for 3 of those little bottles of wine and a hot dog. So, I mean, it was a train, and you know when you're traveling, airplanes and trains and stuff, they're more expensive, but maybe after the first bottle of wine, I thought, oh, I could have more. So, I mean, again, just one of those things you need to keep in mind. It's very expensive. But let's go back to our map, or to where we said on the map, Gothenburg, Sweden. It's another city that's quite accessible. It's not the capital city, but it's right between uh, Denmark and Norway, so it's kind of on the way, so lots of people stop there. And this is another amusement park in the middle of the city, sort of like Tivoli Gardens in Copenhagen. And here you have another Christmas market. Again, lots of Europe, you're gonna have those. And here's my friends and me, just so you know I'm legit and I've been there. So elsewhere in Sweden, you have, of course, the Arctic Circle, like we talked about already. This is known as Lapland, and it's mostly above the Arctic Circle. You can see that some of it goes down into Norway and Sweden, again, in local languages there on the map. And so the Lapland stretches across Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. So it does not touch Denmark. It does not touch Iceland. And this, in parts of it, is where the Sami people, the indigenous Sami culture is from. So it's bordered to the north by the Barents Sea, to the west by the Norwegian Sea, and to the east by the White Sea. And if you're into it and you don't mind the cold weather, it is gorgeous. So you can see on the left picture, that's Lapland in summer, and on the right, that's the Lapland in winter. A few other things people go there for. It might look desolate, but you can see there's vegetation, and so, at least in parts of it, there's wildlife. So this is the Lapland reindeer. And we're going to be seeing one more reindeer, actually. But let's go even farther north in the country to Jukkasjärvi. I don't know how to pronounce Swedish. But this is where the world's first ice hotel was built. And it was quite recent in 1990. And every year it looks different, but here's a picture from one of the years. You can see ice sculptures. There's a bed there, fur blankets to keep you warm. Outside, it would be about -30, and inside about -5. It's a really cool, really unique experience, but maybe not for everybody. I think I would love it, but I know not everybody likes the cold. But like I said, it changes every year because in the summer, the hotel melts and they have to rebuild it. And this is the bar inside. If you ever get a chance to go to an ice bar, it's really cool and not cold. I mean, it is cold, but it's actually really kind of a neat experience. Moving on to Finland. So Helsinki is the capital, down in the south. And let's go to the southeast of the country where all these lakes are. So this is in Finland. It's a country of 1,000 lakes and 1,000 islands. There's about 188,000 lakes in Finland. So the largest of those lakes is called Saimaa, and it's actually the 4th largest in Europe. And the area, this area, is called the Finnish Lakeland. So, I mean, self-explanatory when you look at the fact that there's lots of lakes there. But to visit the Lakeland, the best city to make your home base is Kuopio. And when you think of the sound of this language, you can start to see that Finland is more related to the Russian language, or Finnish is related to the Russian language. So this is the best city, Kuopio, to stay when you're visiting the Lakeland region. There's also in this area easy access to sports like bungee jumping, mountain biking, and rock climbing. Back to our map. Let's go up to Rovaniemi, which is where you'll find Santa's village. So again, some more reindeer, some Lapland reindeer. And in this region, you also have a winter golf tournament, Arctic golf tournament. And instead of white balls, which would not be especially practical, they use orange golf balls. And so Finnish people, like many Canadians, they don't let winter stop them from enjoying the outside. Because if they did, you'd never go outside. I mean, it's hot now, but you know, we have a long winter, and if we said, oh, it's cold, I'm staying inside, we'd never go outside. So they have the golf tournament, and another tradition in Finland is to go in one of these saunas and then go dip in a lake that's covered in ice, and then back and forth and so on. So that's it for Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland. Let's go on to Iceland, which I like to talk about places that people in the class have been. So if you have any stories you want to chime in, please feel free to share. But like I said earlier, we would see that compass again. So here I'm just showing you the Arctic Circle. And when you think of Iceland, you think, oh, it's super cold. It's covered in ice. It must be super far north. Not really. It is north, of course. Otherwise, it wouldn't have glaciers and everything else. But only a tiny, tiny, tiny piece of it, it's not even on this map, is above the Arctic Circle. It's just a tiny set of islands. But otherwise, the whole country is below the Arctic Circle. So, capital city is Reykjavik. Let's zoom in and take a look there. This is Reykjavik in the winter. You'll see it is on the water. You'll see this church in the background that we'll take a closer look at soon. That's kind of the focal point of the city, and it's super impressive when you get a close up to it. But this is one of those things, like I mentioned, some of the questions on these tests, you'll only know the answer to if you come to class or watch the videos. So here's one of those things. The Blue Lagoon. This is one of the most popular things to do as a tourist when you visit Iceland. There's a bunch of reasons why, because it's a natural spring, it's relaxing, it's something we don't often have in Canada, but the main reason is because it's accessible. You have, can you see me? Yeah. The Reykjavik airport, which is it's called Keflavik, but it's the main airport that serves the city of Reykjavik. And you have the city of Reykjavik. So you've got the airport and the city. Right in the middle is Blue Lagoon. So quite often when you're being transferred from the city of Reykjavik to the airport, it's built in the time that you'll spend here. So it's something that like almost every tourist does. And it's called the Blue Lagoon, and it's right between the airport and the city of Reykjavik. So in Reykjavik, what is there to see? I mentioned that church already. I'm definitely not going to try to pronounce it, but this is that church. Super imposing, really impressive. Um, I don't know for the student there who's been, if you walked up the same street I did, there's a bit of a main street, and then you turn. I was looking at a map and I said, oh, I think the church, it's supposed to be down this street. So I turned the corner and looked up, and it's this big long street that leads up to the church. It was so impressive. And when we were there, it was a Sunday at whatever time, let's say 10 in the morning, which was perfect because the bells were chiming. So as we were walking up the street and this church was getting closer and closer, the bells were chiming. It was such a cool moment. So, I mean, again, especially for you who've been to Iceland, there's so much more to talk about when we talk about, well, all of the places we study, but there's not enough time to go into a lot of detail. So we're going to leave Reykjavik there because there's a lot more to see in Iceland. So let's go over to the West Fjords, which is this area of Iceland here in the northwest. This is actually the westernmost part of Europe, and it sits about 280 kilometers from Greenland. And this is where you'll find really rough, jagged scenery. So there's mountains, valleys, moors, beautiful fjords, cliffs. Here's a picture of what you might find in the Western Fjords area. Some more scenery here. And you'll notice that Iceland is very barren, which means there's not a lot of vegetation. There's maybe no trees in most of the country unless you're in a city or near a farm or somebody's planted them essentially. The reason is because it's a volcanic island, and that's one of the things that struck me was that there wasn't any trees anywhere, and it was just like the whole time I felt like I was in a different planet almost. The scenery was just so different. So back to our map, that was the northwest, and let's go over to Eastern Iceland. And this is beginning at about 480 kilometers northeast of Reykjavik and continues about 160 kilometers this way down. So this is where you'll find lots of narrow and long fjords. You can see them coming inland. And a road follows the outline of those fjords, so that winds through lots of fishing villages. And near the town of Hoffen is one of Europe's largest glaciers, which is here, Vatnajökull Glacier. A popular way to get around Iceland is by car. It's a fairly small country, so you can see a lot in a short amount of time. So for lots of reasons, it's a popular destination for Canadian travelers, but so that's one of it, because we like to drive. We're a driving society for the most part, but also it's compact and it's not too far from Canada. When you're thinking about flying time, it might be about 5 hours or so. So let's look at that glacier. That's the Vatnajökull Glacier. Stunning scenery. It's just out of this world. Here's some of the other places in that region, which I'm not going to pronounce, but you can just see the scenery. Now let's go to southern Iceland. This has got lots of history, lots of scenery again. I mean, the whole country has lots of scenery. And this starts just east of Reykjavik. And this is where, and extends 340 kilometers, like it says, to Skaptafell National Park. But this is where lots of the main tourist attractions are, because they're accessible easily from Reykjavik. So you've got the geyser, you've got the volcano Hekla, the Gullfoss, which is Iceland's most famous waterfall, and Thingvallavatn, which is Iceland's largest lake. And that little symbol there that looks like a P is pronounced TH. So that's all in the south. And here is me in the south of Iceland, riding horses and just having the best day of my life. I was way overdressed, by the way. It was not that cold. When I left Canada, actually, it was colder in Canada than it was in Iceland. So I definitely did not need to dress up that much. But here's some of the beautiful pictures from the national parks and things that we went to. I mentioned the Hekla volcano. This is a picture of that. And this produced one of the largest volumes of lava of any volcano in the world in the last century. And you might recognize these sorts of images, Thingvellir National Park. It's not this exact spot, but it's really similar, where it's still in the same national park where they filmed scenes for Game of Thrones. So you might think, oh, that looks a bit familiar. I mentioned Gullfoss, which is Iceland's most famous waterfall. This is that waterfall there. This is one of the natural wonders of the world. It drops 32 meters into a canyon, which is 70 meters deep and 2.5 kilometers long. And this is the waterfall without any of that text in the way there. So for you who's been, I don't want to say your name because we're being recorded. Did you do all of that stuff? Did you go to a place that I didn't mention? Maybe give you some time to type. I only went from Reykjavik east. So I did the capital city and then went south and then along east along the coast there. So we went to Vik, we went to a glacier and a volcano in the same day. We went through ice caves. It's just a really amazing destination with so many things that you can do. Oh, wow. So they went to the Glacier Lagoon and saw an iceberg flipping, which is amazing. I've never heard of that. So yeah, I mean, like I said, I went in the summer when the volcano erupted. Oh, wow. Yeah, I remember one of the volcanoes there erupted in 2010 when I was flying. I was scheduled to fly to Spain like 2 or 3 days after. And that volcano kind of interrupted air traffic to most of Europe, but Spain was not one of the routes, so I could still make it. But yeah, they call it the land of ice and fire because it's being torn apart. It's on two different tectonic plates, the Eurasian one and the North American one. So when they pull apart, I mean, all of these volcanoes erupt, but it's so far north that it's otherwise covered in ice and snow. It's such a cool place. Well, thanks for sharing that. And hopefully we got enough notes for your mom, for the student who's really excited about Scandinavia. It is one of those amazing places, and I know I say that every week, but I mean, obviously I'm excited about travel, otherwise I wouldn't be here talking to you. So that's it for Scandinavia. Next week is going to be Eastern Europe and the rest of Europe. So we're going to talk about like Russia, everything along the Adriatic coast, the Baltic states, and everything else like that. So it's a pretty big lesson, lots to talk about. Here's some reminders before we get there though. Yeah, that's the other thing I should mention is the stopover. So in terms of the reminders, make sure you complete the Scandinavia quiz like every other week. Complete the activity and map work. The activity will help you with that quiz and read those pages. And so that's the countries we talked about today. But the one thing I did want to mention that you reminded me, thank you for that, is that Iceland Air serves Canada to Europe, mainland Europe. And because their hub is in Reykjavik, they always stop there. So you can fly, you know, Toronto, Reykjavik, wherever, Copenhagen, let's say, which is exactly what I did. And so you can extend your stopover. You can give yourself 4 or 5 days in Iceland on the way there. So it's a cheap way. Usually Iceland Air is pretty cheap to get to Europe, but also to see more than one country because you can see Iceland and whichever country or countries you might be going to in mainland Europe. Good, so that's it. I'm gonna stop recording and then I'll ask if there's any questions.